Today, we're going to show you how to do a complete brake job on a 5th Gen 4Runner.
You'll be doing a complete brake job on a 5th Gen 4Runner. Remember, I told you I have conference calls all day.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, here's our plan. We've already got the 4Runner up on jack stands, all 4 corners, good and secure, not moving a bit. Got the tires off. Now this video is going to be very, very detailed. It's going to show you exactly how to disassemble everything and how to put it all back together. This is Wanderlust Overland. Get to there.
Let me see it.
No, get your own.
I want to see
No, get your own! Before you start taking things apart like this, it's always a good idea to take a couple of photos first. Just to make sure it goes back together same way you took it apart. We first need to take off the caliper, but before we can take it off, we have to get some slack in this brake line. You can see right here we have a steel brake line coming from this bracket down into the caliper. So to get that slack, we have to disconnect this bracket from the spindle by taking out this bolt right here. And just be careful with this. These are known to snap off if they're really rusty. So if you do have a rust issue, soak it down for a long time with some PB Blaster or some other penetrant. Penetrant, is that a word? Penetratant? Something like that. You know what I mean. Now, whenever possible, I like to take the bolts that I take out and put them back in the hole they came out of. That way I know that the right bolt goes back in the right spot. Now we're going to see if we can get these old pads out of here before we take the caliper off, because it'll just be a lot easier that way. Now, these pads are held in by these 2 pins right here. To get them out, this is the, we have to take this wire keeper thing out of here. This is the factory one, and we're not going to be reusing it, so it doesn't matter if we get it boogered up or not, but we're going to push that out of there. And then that should just come right out of those pins. There we go. I'm going to take a screwdriver and put it in here and try to pry. These are the shoes right here on either side. I'm going to try to pry the shoe away from the rotor if I can. And don't worry about destroying this pad with the screwdriver, because it's junk anyways. And what we're doing is we're just compressing these pistons into the caliper. That's working good. And we'll do it on this side. Come on. There we go. You may find that when you press in these, the fluid will go over to here and push these out. But if you work at it a little bit, you should get all those pistons pushed all the way in. There we go. Now we can pull these pins out all the way. If the stubborn one up here will come out, I need a bigger hammer. There we go. Now these pins we're going to be reusing, so just after you get them out, just take a look at them. Make sure they're not bent. That one looks good. Now on to this pin clippy wire thing right here. Remember how this comes out, because this has to go back in the same way, and it's a little tricky, kinda. Not too bad, but that's why we took that picture too at the beginning. So this wire goes into the holes in the pads right here. So we're going to take screwdriver, and there we go, that came out. See that? Do the same thing on this side, and there we go. Now take this pin out, and that comes right out. So now these pads are coming out really easy. The caliper is held on by 2 bolts, not these 2 right here that are easy to get to. It's these 2 bolts on the back side right here. These can be pretty stubborn. They're on there pretty tight, so piece of pipe on your ratchet is actually off of our floor jack. And there we go. And there we go. We'll take that hanger, that coat hanger, and hang this up nice and secure. The rotors are most likely not going to come off real easy. They're really tight down here where they meet up with the hub. So there's 2 ways to do this. One way, which we're going to try first, is take a soft hammer on the back side and give it some taps. Now if that doesn't work, you'll find 2 holes in the rotor that are tapped. You can run some bolts into these holes evenly and then tighten them up evenly, and that will act like a puller and it'll actually pop that off. But we're going to keep trying with the hammer first. After a little bit more friendly persuasion, a little bit of PB Blaster shot down into the holes and around the sides here, and maybe a little bit of swearing, and now comes right off. On to the other side. Okay, on to the rear. Things are a little different back here. The caliper is a little bit different. For one thing, we can't take the pads out with the caliper on. Another thing is the caliper and the caliper bracket both have to come off. And of course, just like the front, we first take a picture. Now back here, we don't have to worry about taking off a bracket for the brake line, because from this bracket to the caliper is actually a rubber line. So that's going to give us plenty of flexibility to get that caliper up and out of the way. 4 bolts. We've got these 2 right here, and 2, where are they? Right there. These are the bolts putting the caliper to the caliper bracket. And we'll also do these hanger brackets. Okay, all 4 bolts are out. Now I can pull the caliper out of here. Come on. There we go. And then we'll carefully put that back behind here. Then this whole caliper bracket in the shoes inside here comes right off. And there you go. First I'm going to mark it. This is the left rear. And then take some penetrant. That is a word, by the way. I looked it up. And there it goes. Oh, one thing I forgot to tell you. Make sure that the emergency brake is off, otherwise this will never come off. The reason is that's your emergency brake right here. It's like an old-fashioned drum brake, and that actually clamps on into the inside of this rotor. So this is like a drum brake on a rotor. Okay, I'm going to run into town real quick with these to drop them off to be resurfaced. I'll be right back. While those are off being machined, there's a few things that we need to take care of in preparation for putting everything back together. One thing in the rear here is I want to take a look at our emergency brake. As long as the caliper is off and we can look at it. First, because of all the crap that we drive through, all the mud and stuff, it's a mess in here. I'm going to blow it out first. Cover your eyes. Everything looks like it's where it's supposed to be, and the pads aren't worn at all, hardly. So, another thing we can do is clean up the surface here where the rotor goes onto it and get all the rust and crap off of there. And same thing with the caliper on the edge of the piston here. We want to clean all the gunk and rust off of that. And wherever any of the bolts go in, need to make sure everything's nice and cleaned up. Now we need to do a little bit of work with the front calipers. We need to make sure they're nice and clean here where the pads ride, which is right here, 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 and here, and on the face of these pistons. All that has to be cleaned off. Make sure there's no rust or dirt or gunk in there. And while you're doing it, just get a good look at the piston seals. Make sure nothing is torn. Nothing's leaking. Another thing I'm going to do is before we put any rotors back on, I'm going to take some of this gold anti-seize and put a thin layer all along here. That way, hopefully, next time those rotors will come off a lot easier. All right, we got our rotors back from the shop. Kinda. There was a little snafu. It turns out that they did not have the proper adapter to mount our front ones on their machine. So they gave us brand new ones at the same cost as it was going to cost to have my old ones turned. So that was really cool. One thing about getting new rotors is they always come with an oil coating on them so they don't rust when they're on the shelf. To take care of that, we spray them down with some brake clean. Get all that oil off of these surfaces where the pads are going to ride. Okay, front first. Now, if these were the old ones, the old rotors, I'd want to make sure that this surface in here was nice and clean, free of rust. Let me put that on. Bring the caliper back over. We can take this wire off of it. Lay this down. And put the big bolts back in. Then we take our trusty torque wrench and torque them down to the factory specs. Now, do you remember when we took this caliper off, we actually put a screwdriver in here and we pried on the old pads and pushed these pistons in? And they're all the way in. Now, if you forgot to do that or for some reason they pushed back out, you can push them back in by just taking the old pad and before you put it on here, while it's still over here, put a pad in. Put a little pad in there. Then you can take either welding pliers like this and put it in there and squeeze those pistons in, or you can always just take a C-clamp and put that on there and that'll draw those pistons in too. Before we go any further, I want to put this bracket back onto the spindle and here, let's get this wire all the way out of here. So here's the bolt, still in the spindle where I left it. So we know that's the right bolt, and it goes right there. And I don't know a torque spec, but tight enough, but not too tight. How's that? There, that's good. Now we can put the pads in, but before we do that, I'm going to take a little bit of this brake caliper grease. This is a high temperature grease. Don't just use regular grease on here. And I'm going to put a little grease, don't overdo it. Put a little grease right here where the the pads are going to ride in the caliper. And then here's our pads, and we're using OEM type ceramic pads. Going to take a little bit of that brake grease, put it on the back side where the pistons are going to ride. Just a little layered, you don't need much, and you don't want too much on there. And then we can put these right in there. There's that one. And there. Then we can put the pins in, and these are the pins that we took out. I just took them to the bench grinder on a wire wheel and cleaned them up really good. We'll put the top one in first. It goes through the hole of the caliper, through the hole in this pad here, over to the next pad, and out there. Now, the aftermarket has a little different pins than the factory ones. Remember that factory one that was a big wire that went all along here? Now we have these little, I call them S-clips, and they go through, if I can find it, there it is. They go through, no, that's not it. There it is. They go through that little hole, and that keeps the pin in. Then we take this one, that you do get a new one of these. This is that goofy kind of clip. I'm going to take these gloves off so I can handle it better. And that goes, let's see, how's it go? It goes like this. And these little tangs go into these holes on the pads. And this, these two ends here, they go down in here, just like that. And then your pin goes through the caliper, through your pad, and then through that clip to hold that clip or the spring thing in. Same way on this other side. Goes through. Come on. And out the other side. And we put a clip in there. And that's it. And you want to make sure that this wire tang here is not touching the rotor at all. And one double check, make sure everything is in there properly. And that's on. Pins are in, these are torqued down. And we're ready to go to the back. So this is what we took off the back. This is the caliper bracket with the pads in it. And you'll see here, they ride, the pads actually ride on these little metal clips or guides. And you get all new ones with the pads. And they look like this. Let's see if I can orient it just right. Yeah, just like that. That's that piece right there. And this piece is that little squealer that will tell you when you need to change your brakes. And you get a new one of those too with the pads, and that's what that looks like. That's that thing right there. Now these are rubber boots where the caliper bolts and pin will ride into. These need to be in good shape. If yours are trashed, they do sell new ones of these. They're readily available at all the parts stores. Get new ones if you need them. Give it a little persuasion. There we go. There's a little bit of rust and crap holding it in there. But yeah, there's the old pads, and you'll see here there's those clips or those runners. They just pop right out. Just like that. We'll take this out. And these clips. And then we're going to take the wire brush to all these surfaces too and get these nice and cleaned up. Now we're putting in these I don't even know what you call these, sliders or whatever. And they are side specific. You can see they're a little bit different. This little tang that sticks down the most right here, that goes on the outside. So it goes on just like this. And it helps to put it, and there's also a tang on the inside. There's a little one here. Get that started on the inside first, because it kind of clamps on there. And then you can kind of roll this side on there, and it goes on. And then, to make sure that this is seated properly right here, we'll take a little punch, and you gotta be careful you don't dent or ding or put any dimples in this metal, but just gently tap that, make sure it's all the way down in that groove, like that. And just like the fronts, we're gonna take a little bit of caliper grease, a little bit, because this will get all over the place if you're not careful, and put it right here where those pads are gonna ride. Now to put the pads in, they take a little bit of finessing, I guess you can call it, and a little bit of swearing maybe. Put one end in first, like that, and then the other one should slide, yep, it slides right in then, just like that. This is that little squealer tang when your brakes get too low. This hits the rotor. Put that one in first, into the groove. And then, now these, and you'll see when we go to put them on, these slide on pins with the caliper. So we're gonna put a little bit of grease. Well, let me get something else. My multi-tool. Take some of that grease and put it inside here to lube that pin that slides in and out. Okay, we'll put the rotor on. And then the assembly we just put together, and it goes on like this with these rubber boots going inward. And then we'll take our bolts and bolt it on, and they go through these holes here. We're going to leave these a little loose for now. Now we can take the caliper itself and swing it around, but before we can put it on here, we have to compress this piston, and there's only one piston on the back. So we're using our Weldon clamp here, or Weldon vice grip things. We're going to use that to push it in. But before we can put the caliper on here, we're going to take some more of that grease, and it's going to ride on this pad right here and on the piston on the back side. So we'll put a little bit here. A little on there, maybe a little bit more on the back here. There we go. Then we can slide it down on to the pads. Make sure your boots are okay. There we go. Same way with this bolt down here. Make sure your boot isn't bent over where the pin won't go through. Now we've got two different torque specs back here. For the bolts that hold the bracket to the axle, that's 78 foot-pounds. And these bolts that hold the caliper to the bracket itself, these are 65 foot-pounds. Well, I think that we're all done here. We'll go through everything again, make sure everything is tight and where it's supposed to be, and then we'll put the tires on and take it out for a test drive.
If this is your first time watching one of our videos and you'd like to see more, hit the subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the bell if you want to be notified.